Hey, welcome to Anime What Ifs. This is part 20 of What If Naruto Married Temari. Naruto stared nervously at the door to the Kazekage's manor. He was extremely hesitant to enter and face Temari, especially considering he'd ordered Asuma and Shikamaru to hold her there while he was supposedly fighting her brother. If things happened according to plan, Asuma should have briefed Temari and his team after he'd called in the mission success code of Clear Skies, but that probably wasn't going to save him from Temari's temper. From her place on the roof, Anko was watching Naruto with a great deal of amusement. She'd read the reports on him and she found it hilarious that the boy would unflinchingly face down much stronger shinobi but was terrified of his wife's temper. "It's a door gaki," she called from her perch. "You turn the knob, open it and enter. It's not that hard." Naruto rolled his eyes at the advice. "Gee, thanks Hibi-chan. You're always so helpful." When the masked woman just shrugged with an obvious air of amusement, Naruto sighed and decided he might as well get it over. Opening the door, he pasted a cheerful smile on his face that died when Temari honed in on him with an icy glare. He froze as she stalked across the room towards him, noting the overly controlled motions that screamed rage to him. He opened his mouth to say something, but was stopped when Temari's fist flashed forward and impacted on his ribs with a sickening snap that drove him to his knees. Struggling to regain his breath, he could only watch as Temari stood over him with a murderous glare. "How could you?" she growled. "He was your friend, my brother. How could you kill him?" Naruto flinched as her controlled tone gave way to a rage and pain-filled roar. Still having trouble breathing, Naruto weakly held a hand up towards her. "Wait," he managed to stammer out. "Didn't fight him, mission was to help him." Temari reached down and hooked Naruto by his jacket collar, yanking him up only to pin him against the wall, his feet dangling a few inches off the floor. "Explain," she commanded coldly. Taking a few moments to compose himself, Temari jerking him off the floor had done some agonizingly painful things to his ribs. Naruto met her gaze evenly. "I was sent on a mission. I was to help Gaara dispose of traitors in the advisory committee." Temari searched his face for any of his tells and concluded that he was telling her the truth, but in some ways, that actually made her even more angry. She released his collar and stepped back, planting her fists on her hips and used her height advantage to loom over her husband. "You didn't think I should know this?" she all but hissed at him. Naruto winced. Before she'd broken his ribs, this was the part he'd been most worried about. "The mission request from Suna explicitly said you were not to be told, Temari-chan. The only people who knew were Asuma-sensei, the ANBU escort squad, Gaara, Kankuro, Baki and me. He'd probably have gotten a smaller reaction if he'd slapped her." Temari's face flushed and she gritted her teeth and reached behind her back for her fan, before she abruptly straightened and stormed from the room without another word. Naruto watched her go with a profound sense of unease and guilt. He knew firsthand how much it sucked to have secrets kept from you, but he needed to explain in a more private setting. Dragging himself to his feet, arm wrapped around his aching ribs, he stumbled across the room and collapsed on the couch next to Suma. Rolling his head towards the Jonin, he glared at the man. "Why the hell didn't you tell her I didn't kill Gaara?" he demanded testily. Asuma blew a streamer of smoke and pointed up. "I tried, she wasn't listening, and after she pulled this wind jutsu that slammed me into the ceiling, I decided that it was your problem." Naruto moved his gaze to where Asuma was pointing to see a large indent in the ceiling, and he winced in sympathy. To make that large of a dent in a brick ceiling, Temari must have used a lot of power. It served as a reminder that his wife was a damn powerful kunoichi even in her second trimester of pregnancy. He winced again as the pain from his ribs drove the point home. "Gotcha, that had to hurt Asuma-sensei." Asuma chuckled around his ever-present cigarette. "Yeah, took me by surprise, but I'm gonna have to make her show me that jutsu. Not a lot of wind users in Konoha, and it was a pretty sweet little jutsu." Ino began to get irritated at the banter between the two. "Naruto, what are you doing? Go talk to her." Naruto gave her an incredulous look. "Ino-chan, in my experience, being punched does not mean a girl wants to talk. Ino looked aside and pressed the heel of her palm against her forehead with a muttered, "Forehead." Lowering her hand and turning back, she adopted a lecturing tone more suited to a not very bright child. "Naruto, not all girls are like Sakura, you know. I'm telling you that if you don't go talk to her, you're gonna regret it." Naruto shifted forward towards Ino on the couch and winced at the pain it caused. "And I'm telling you, I really don't think she wants to talk." Ino sniffed and crossed her arms. "Fine, don't listen to the only girl in the room, but I warned you." "Fine, you warned me, now can you do something about my ribs please?" "Baka," Ino muttered before moving forward to scan his ribs with a basic medical jutsu. She whistled under her breath as she saw the extent of the damage from that one punch. She really did a number here, Naruto. There are hairline fractures on several ribs and 2 on your sternum. How the hell did you get up and walk over here? Naruto winced as she switched from scanning to healing. It beat even his fast recovery time, but having someone force your bones to heal at an accelerated rate was unpleasant. High pain tolerance. He grunted. He managed to distract himself when he noticed Ino had her tongue partially sticking out of the corner of her mouth as she concentrated. It was really cute, but wisely he refrained from saying anything. He'd already suffered enough under female hands today as far as he was concerned. Ino sat back with a sigh and wiped sweat from her forehead with her arm. "Done," she said tiredly. "It's gonna be sore for a few days, but nothing I can do about that." Shifting around and stretching, Naruto flashed her a pleased grin. "Thanks Ino-chan, that was awesome. You're getting really good at that medical stuff." Ino turned to hide the light blush his words caused and moved back to her earlier seat. Seeking a way to change the subject before anyone noticed her embarrassment, she decided to ask about the mission. "Okay, so since Asuma-sensei wasn't able to brief us before, what actually happened?" Her gossip instincts told her that this was probably a really good story. It was a pity it would probably be classified. Naruto quickly traded glances with Asuma and Kakashi, and both of the older shinobi just shrugged. "Might as well be me. If I head into classified stuff, I'm sure one of them will stop me." Sinking back in the comfortable couch, Naruto scratched his cheek in thought. Where to begin? He mused softly. "Well, I'm sure Shikamaru told you we ran into Gaara during our last mission, right?" After the two brat ran away, he paused and glared when Shikamaru had to stifle a laugh. "As I was saying, after the mission ended, Gaara approached me and asked for my help. It had already been decided that he would become Kazekage, but he had concerns about the internal politics here in Sunagakure." "Naruto," Kakashi said with a subtle undertone of warning. Naruto held his palm up towards Kakashi. "Don't worry, Inu-san, I'm just covering the basics." Getting a satisfied nod from Kakashi, he turned his attention back to Team 8 and was unsurprised to find them studying him carefully. So what troubled Gaara was that he didn't believe it would have been possible for even Orochimaru to have impersonated the previous Kazekage without inside help. Shikamaru had his hands in his thinking pose. "I see," he said slowly. He couldn't trust anyone in Sunagakure but you. He knew where your loyalty would be. Naruto nodded at the lazy genius. "Yeah," he said sheepishly. "We spent some time working out the details and then I took the mission to Bachan." Shikamaru nodded while Ino and Choji still looked confused. "It was very clever of Gaara to seek Naruto's assistance," he told his team. "Temari-san told me when we've chatted during our shogi games that Naruto is the only one that has ever defeated Gaara. Naruto comes to Sunagakure and he and Gaara stage a fight. The traitors on the committee would never be able to pass up possibly their only chance to eliminate Gaara, so they enlist Naruto's aid, claiming it to be the will of the committee. Being an allied shinobi, supposedly very angry with Gaara, Naruto would have little choice but to and a great deal of motive to fight Gaara." Ino's eyes lit up. "But instead of fighting each other, they turn on the traitors, right?" Naruto nodded. "Yeah, that about sums it up." Shikamaru shook his head. This plan was insane. If something had gone wrong, it would have probably kicked off another shinobi war, he said tiredly. Naruto stuck his tongue out childishly. Well, it didn't go wrong, so there. I don't understand. Sorry, what was that, Choji? Naruto asked. Choji idly shoved a chip in his mouth and chewed as he thought. I'm not sure I understand some of this. Everyone knows you and Gaara are friends. Why would the committee assume you would fight Gaara? Naruto winced. This was going to skirt some personal issues. That Gaara and I are friends is common knowledge in Konoha, Naruto agreed. But here in Suna, not so much. There are many people here that don't believe Gaara is even capable of friendship. These same people would also believe the same thing about me because of the burden Gaara and I both carry. Naruto rubbed his temple in frustration over that sort of thought process. Every shinobi is a weapon for their village, he said after a small pause. That doesn't mean that's all we are, but it is the truth. Still, if every shinobi is a weapon, say a kunai, then those like Gaara and myself would be more like swords. Seeing he'd lost Choji and Ino, he backtracked a bit. The traitors were the sort to believe that Jinchuriki aren't human, so they never would have believed Gaara and I were friends. Seeing pity on Ino and Choji's faces, Naruto opened his mouth in irritation, only to be cut off by Shikamaru. The benefits of this plan are obvious, but the potential consequences are very troubling. I don't see Hokage-sama agreeing to this simply to further ties with Tsunagakure. What was worth the risk for Konoha, Naruto? Still in his thinking pose, he spoke again before Naruto could answer his last question. Yes, I know that you would have done this simply because Gaara is your friend. I can also understand that you feel obligated to help your brother-in-law, but that can't be the sole reason. Naruto sighed and nodded. Yes, you're right, there was something else. He conceded. You might not be aware of this, but part of the marriage contract stated that our firstborn male child would be required to marry a Tsunagakure kunoichi. From what Temari-chan told me, the advisory committee wanted to start a Namikaze clan branch here in Suna. He paused to make sure he still had control of his temper. No one had told him about that little detail until after he'd married Temari, and he wasn't sure which pissed him off more, the fact that his son's life was being dictated or that no one had felt he had the right to know, let alone say anything about it. Sure that he wasn't going to lose control of his temper, he continued the story. So, Gaara wasn't fond of the people who decided his fate before he was born, also deciding his nephew's fate, for some odd reason. Tomorrow, after he is sworn in as Kazekage, the first thing Gaara plans to do is strike that portion from the contract. I see. Shikamaru said as he relaxed from his thinking pose. The game you play, Naruto, it's almost better than shogi. Gotta look underneath the underneath. Naruto said with a crooked grin, silently thanking Shikamaru with his eyes for dropping the subject. Shikamaru might understand much of the hidden currents, but neither of his teammates would without a great deal of explaining. Somebody had played a long, subtle game with that little number, and Naruto really didn't feel like explaining how having a child allied with another village would prevent him from becoming Hokage but still strengthen village ties at the same time. As he'd told Kiba, he wasn't at the level he could keep up with the elder shinobi and kunoichi yet. I wonder if I should invite Shikamaru over to discuss these things with me and Temari-chan. If she ever decides to speak to me again, that is. Fuck, I hate my life sometimes. Naruto, Ino said. Why weren't you allowed to tell us or Temari-san? Naruto frowned and shot a glance at Asuma, who flicked his eyes around the room briefly before resuming his usual lazy look. Sorry, Ino-chan, I don't really know why it was added to my orders. He lied with a straight face. That was a really stupid question to ask while we are still in Suna, Ino-chan. Getting to his feet, Naruto stretched, ignoring the slight twinge from his ribs. Alright guys, it's been a really long day, and I need to go beat the hell out of a Kage. See ya in the morning. Ignoring the irritated look on Ino's face, Naruto quickly used a shunshin to escape any other questions. Ino stared at the handful of leaves drifting to the floor with irritation, then turned to glare at her team. That was rude. I had more questions. Shikamaru glanced up and met her gaze. That's probably why he ran off. You're very troublesome. You owe me big time for this, Naruto, he thought as Ino predictably flared up. He traded a wry glance with Choji as the blonde started lacing into them. Make that, he owes us. With night having fallen, Naruto knew there were only a handful of places he'd have to search for Gaara. Unable to sleep, his friend could almost always be found somewhere high watching the moon and the stars. In many ways, it was very similar to Naruto retreating to stone depiction of his father and watching out over the village. Finding his target, Naruto jumped over and sat down next to his friend with a deep sigh. The two boys sat watching the stars in comfortable silence for several minutes until Gaara spoke. I assume things went poorly if you are here, Naruto. Naruto winced in memory and threw Gaara a crooked smile. Just a bit. She broke my ribs 'cause she thought I killed you. Remind me to thank you for that one of these days. Gaara's lip twitched then stilled. I am her brother, but you are her husband. It seemed fitting that you face her wrath rather than I. Naruto chuckled. Oh, you are such an ass sometimes, but never fear, oh brother-in-law of mine. I'm completely certain that she's going to take a strip out of your hide tomorrow. Gaara nodded. Not unexpected. Were you able to inform her of the mission payment? Naruto frowned heavily. No. He said with a large sigh. I walked in, she broke my ribs and then stormed off when I told her it was the mission orders that kept me from telling her about it beforehand. I briefed Team 8 and then I came to find you. I figured I'd let her cool off some. That is unfortunate. Gaara replied evenly. Observing my siblings, I have noted that any time Kankuro left her alone after angering her, Temari only grew more angry. Naruto dragged his palm down his face. Well, that's wonderful, he said with irritation. So, by not following her after she punched me, I probably made her even more angry? That was what always seemed to happen with Kankuro. Gaara replied. Great, just freaking great. Not only do I have to deal with a pissed Temari-chan, Ino-chan is never going to let me live this down. Seeing the question in Gaara's eyes, Naruto explained. Ino-chan told me I needed to follow Temari-chan. Told me I would regret it if I didn't. I dearly hate it when Ino-chan is right and knows it. It's unpleasant. Gaara turned his face back towards the sky. Yes, I'm sure it is. Several minutes passed as Gaara listened with hidden amusement as Naruto ranted about stubborn, irritating blondes. The irony of that particular statement was undoubtedly lost on his friend for the moment, but Gaara felt he owed it to his Naruto to use it against him at some point in the future. After all, he mused, what sort of Kage would he be if he didn't use something like this against another Kage? That thought brought him back to the present. Was there a way to help his friend survive his sister, at least long enough to become Hokage? He was fairly sure, even with his limited ability to interact socially, that both Naruto and Temari would be less than amused if he threatened to crush them with his sand unless they stopped fighting. Still, he wasn't sure about the situation in general. If two people who care about you, that acknowledge you fight, who are you supposed to support? He was shaken from his thoughts when Naruto finished his rant and flopped onto his back to stare at the sky. I know you don't have the answers, he said softly, but what am I supposed to do? This doesn't seem like the sort of problem you can just beat into submission. I don't think I did anything wrong, so why is she so angry? Gaara shrugged uncomfortably and considered his words carefully. I suspect that you will simply have to follow your heart, Naruto. Emotions are difficult for me, but they seem necessary if my existence is not to ring hollow. I envy you for that. The night was quiet again as the two retreated into their own thoughts until several minutes later when Naruto popped to his feet and stretched. Bah, enough with the talking. That fight earlier got my blood pumping and I haven't had a sparring partner lately that I can go all out on. He smirked at Gaara. I'm pretty sure you can take anything I can dish out, right Gaara? Gaara's lips curved into his almost smile as he watched Naruto hop down off the roof and head out into the desert. Naruto's words were true,